Welcome to discussion 4D, Members of Congress and Decision Making. These are our topics for today. What is the job of a representative like? How does the incumbency help? What are congressional demographics like? What are the different models or theories of representation? And how do representatives make decisions? So, number one, what is the job of a representative like? It was not until after World War I when service in the House was considered a career move. Maybe some in Congress are beginning to see service as it was originally. It's much more challenging. It's an extremely difficult job. Members of Congress could earn much more money elsewhere in the private sector, especially as lobbyists. Members of Congress have to serve two constituencies as well. They have to serve those in D.C., those in Washington, like their political party, their committees that they're on, the lobbyists that seek to influence them, and those back home in their districts. The schedule can be a rat race. It's a very tough and grinding schedule. So the prerequisites for working as a member of Congress probably have to be a member of one of the two major parties. State election laws make it very difficult for minor third-party candidates to get elected, and a member of Congress has to be able to raise a lot of money. There's some evidence that some members of Congress will spend up to 3 to 4 hours a day fundraising, attending a fundraiser every day on average. The saying is that money is the mother's milk of politics, so a member of Congress has to be able to raise a lot of it. So there are many advantages to being an incumbent when running for Congress. And those advantages include things like name recognition, access to free media, the inside track on fundraising, and in a lot of cases, districts drawn to favor the incumbent. There's also something called a frank that a member of Congress gets to use. And a frank, the name comes from a facsimile signature on an envelope, hence the name frank. It's an envelope that has the member of Congress's signature in place of a stamp, and it helps with name recognition. It's come to symbolize just another incumbent advantage. It gives members of Congress free postage. It's not useful campaign literature that gets sent out, but it's helps with name recognition. So members of Congress can freely send their constituents updates on their legislative accomplishments, and it's a big advantage when they campaign. Now, speaking of the advantages of the incumbency, these are the re-election rates in the United States House from 64 to 2014, and you can see in the House the incumbency re-election rate is extremely high. 90%, 95% in some years. So some people feel like there should be term limits to members of the House, and others argue that there are term limits, and they're called elections, and the common saying is kick the bum out. If you don't feel like your representative's doing a good job, then don't vote him or her back in. The re-election rates are a little bit lower in the Senate. They're still very high, usually above 80%, right around 80%. And the lower rates of re-election in the Senate might be because there are less senators per state than members of the House in most states in the country. So these elections happen less often. They're statewide, so they become much more prominent. They get much more coverage, and Senate races usually attract higher quality candidates. So people are paying more attention to the Senate races compared to House races. People typically approve of their congressperson, but not of Congress in general. So maybe people are happy with their representative in Congress. There's also something called the sophomore surge. A congressperson will typically see a bump in the polls when they run for re-election. Usually somewhere between 5-10%. They'll poll at 5 or 10% higher, win 5 or 10% greater share of the electorate the second time they run compared to the first time when they won the seat. So who are members of Congress? Well, they tend to be better educated, richer, more male, and more white than the rest of the country. There tends to be lots of inherited wealth. The number of millionaires has gone up even since the textbook that we use came out. The Senate has the nickname of the Millionaires Club. The average age in the Senate is 60. In the House, it's 45. The number of non-white males is growing, but it's not reflective of the population as a whole. Most members of Congress are lawyers, although that number is declining. And the number of veterans, the number who have served in the military, is also declining. Now here's a graphic that summarizes the disparities between the makeup of Congress and the makeup of the American people. It's overwhelmingly male, whereas this would be more reflective of the population. It's overwhelmingly white, whereas this would be more reflective of the population. And it's overwhelmingly Protestant and Catholic, whereas this would be more reflective of the population in general. Does this matter? Do demographics play a role? Can a man represent the interests of a woman? Can the rich represent the interests of the poor? Are representatives of a certain ethnicity supposed to represent the interest of that ethnicity? They're interesting questions about congressional demographics. Now, we get into the different theories of representation, and these are very, very important. The different models or theories of representation. So one is called the trustee model, and these all address how constituents' interests are best represented by a legislative body. So in the trustee model, the idea is that the representative would listen to their constituents and then can be trusted to use his or her best judgment to make a final decision. So the representative would try to do what their constituents want, but ultimately would end up making their own decision, would end up making the decision that the representative thinks is best, even if it goes against the wishes of the majority of people in their district. That's the trustee model. The delegate model is where the representative would be willing to vote against his or her own conscience or personal preference if that representative knows that is how their constituents would want them to vote. So they would vote the way their district wants them to vote no matter what, as a delegate model. Some problems with these models, though, it's often unclear how constituents would like their representatives to vote. So sometimes a third category exists, and that's called a politico. Politicos alternate between being a delegate and a trustee depending on the scenario. So on issues of great concern to their constituents, they would represent a delegate. They would want to vote how their constituents want them to vote. But on less visible issues, they might play the role of trustee. So issues where their constituents might not have a lot of knowledge, foreign affairs, for example, or their constituents might not even know a vote is coming, then they might play the role of a trustee rather than a delegate. And finally, in decision making, there are lots of considerations for members of Congress. They will look to many sources of information to avoid making a voting mistake. So they'll look to their party, especially with the help of the whip. They'll look to, especially on party line votes, and those are becoming more common in a polarized Congress. And this is especially true in a divided government where different political parties control the White House and Congress. Members know that party support is crucial for re-election, so upsetting the party is not in a representative's best interest. Members will also look to their constituents. These are the people who live and vote in the home district or state of the member of Congress. It's rare for a representative to vote against the wishes of his or her constituents frequently because they would vote to kick the bum out. And it can be tough or to get an accurate sense of what the constituents want, especially on evenly divided issues like abortion or divisive issues as well. They can look to their colleagues and their caucuses. Many times there's an issue that a representative does not know much about, so in these cases they can turn to a colleague for more info, and that leads to something called log rolling or vote trading, where a member of Congress would vote yay to support a colleague's bill with the expectation of future support. And this often happens on a specialized bill that would bring money for projects to a specific district. Log rolling is as old as politics itself. It's vote trading. I'll support your bill if you support mine. The scratch your back, scratch yours. It provides cover for legislators to do an interest group's bidding. It's a way to grease the wheels of the legislature. And many people think it's a good thing because it leads to compromise and it leads to getting things done. And here's an instance recently of a budget deal that was worked out. And the title there is How Old-Fashioned Log Rolling Produced Congress's Massive Budget Deal. Representatives will also look at interest groups, lobbyists, and PACs. Their organization is... These groups are very, very important to helping legislators make decisions. Organized interest groups can win over undecided legislators by providing reliable information. And we know that the high cost of campaigning makes it so representatives are more likely to be attentive to those who can pick up the tab, like PACs or super PACs and all these groups we learned about in the last unit, the 527s, the 501c groups. And there's one more group that can help Congress people make their decisions. These are known as staff and support agencies. These are organizations that are provided to members of Congress to help give them information. There's three examples. The first one is the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. This evaluates the effects of spending programs, so things like budgets and economic plans. And the CBO is supposed to provide nonpartisan, non-party-based analysis. So even after something becomes law, the CBO will analyze the economic impact of the law, or in some cases will look at proposals and how those proposals would impact certain economic situations. There's also the CRS, the Congressional Research Service. This is administered by the Library of Congress, and it responds to requests by lawmakers. So it's almost like a research branch for lawmakers. And the GAO, the General Accountability Office, sets accounting standards. It will provide legal opinions. So if a member of Congress has a question about the implications of a bill, then the GAO might be able to provide advice. Because the Supreme Court and the federal courts will not give members of Congress or the President any advice about whether or not a future law might be unconstitutional. The GAO might be a better place to go to get that information. All right, that takes us to the end of how members of Congress will make their decisions. Let me know at the link below if you have any comments, questions, concerns, or anything that needs clarification. Hope it helped, and good luck studying.